Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Daniel Kelly. Daniel Kelly is a health and fitness coach, entrepreneur, and biohacker who helps people, especially high-performing men, optimize their lifestyles to gain the extra focus, energy, and time they need to be better leaders, fathers, and husbands. He earned his BA in International Business at the Business School of Nottingham Trent University. He used to be a successful financial guy in London, but upon knowing that his testosterone level is like an 80-year-old man's, that's when his world turned upside down and decided to dive into living and encouraging others to live a healthier lifestyle. Apart from being a deep health coach, Daniel is also into traveling and learning languages. FYI, he speaks 6 languages. Writing another best-selling book on Amazon. He wrote Optimize Under 35. Reading, boxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu, hiking, climbing, doing sports, and muscle building, enhancing. His broad spectrum of interests made him interesting enough to be featured in different articles, including The Sun, The Guardian, and recently he was a guest on Anthony Pompiliano, I don't know, Pompilano YouTube channel. I don't know if I said that right, you guys. Just gonna have to forgive me on that. It was really a great podcast. We talked about energy, hormones, female and male, and stepping into the masculine when you're a man and stepping into the feminine when you're a lady, and how sometimes we get crossed and maybe we step a little into the masculine and they step a little into the feminine. It was pretty interesting. I hope you guys enjoy this. It's all about biohacking our bodies, all things health and nutrition and fitness. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode with Daniel. I'm very excited to welcome Daniel Kelly to the Sisterhood of Sweat today.
Thanks for having me, Linda. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited. I love the accent. I'm sure the listeners are going to love the accent. Where about in the UK are you from?
I'm from a place called Manchester originally, so some of your listeners might be familiar with Manchester United. So that was my team when I was growing up. So northwest of England originally.
That's cool. What are your favorite memories growing up there? Things that you enjoyed?
Oh, that's a great question. So things that I enjoyed, I think my childhood, so I'm in my mid-30s now, my childhood is probably a little bit different to what kids have these days. And I think what I really enjoyed was a sense of freedom, and I could go out and play football, as we call it in the UK, not soccer, guys. Sorry. So lots of football, lots of time freedom, like playing with my friends. Just when I had quite a good childhood in that sense, like I had a lot of freedom, and my parents gave me free reign, and where I lived was quite nice, and I lived in the countryside, so I had good memories when I was a kid, and that, I think that's what really got me into exercise and sports as an adult.
Oh my gosh, I had so much freedom too. My dad would stand on the front porch to call me home at dinner, and I would hear his whistle all the way down the street. And I knew it was time to come and eat dinner. But I wish kids had as much time freedom and were as safe as we were back when we were kids, because I think it's healthier to be able to be outside, getting your vitamin D, running, playing, and kids these days are behind, the screen, the social media. They're not really developing real relationships. I actually was reading about that in your book, where you were talking about men that thought that, just watching porn and they don't really need to go get a real relationship. Can you kind of dive into that part of the book? I would love for the listeners to hear that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, and we can talk about this subject, but I think that low testosterone among men is an is an epidemic, and that's scientifically proven. So there was one interesting study by a guy called Travison, which followed thousands of subjects over, I think it was a 25 year period. And what they found was that men's testosterone significantly declined from the 80s. This study was started in the 80s to like early 2000s, I think. And I think that the popularization of porn goes hand in hand with low testosterone because it's so easily accessible. And so as a man has men and women both have strong sexual drives, but men especially have this very strong sexual urge, right? And like, so if they don't learn how to control it or channel it in the right way, then they're going to resort to porn because it's so easily accessible. And then what does that do? That doesn't mean that they develop important social skills that they could develop to meet the opposite sex, or important social skills that are going to get them further on in life, because developing human relationships is an important skill in life, right? So they're just stuck behind the screen, whether they're playing video games or watching porn. And so it really is an epidemic.
Well, it's like a virtual reality, but it's not a reality at all, is it?
That's not a reality. And I think deep down most men know that, but they probably what happens is they're stuck in a vicious cycle, and then they don't want to do it, but it's like an addict. It's a form of addiction, right? So
it's an easier way to get what they want, is in a way, right?
Yeah, it's easy to if you can't master your impulses or your urges, it's an easy way to kind of get off, right? Much the same with a drug, any form of drug or alcohol.
Yeah, like an addiction. So what you were saying about the low testosterone, it's kind of an epidemic now, isn't it?
So I think that in the society that we live in today, we have a perfect storm of conditions which create this low testosterone in men. And you could argue that while women don't have the testosterone levels of men, both sexes are suffering from a degree of hormonal imbalance simply because of the environment that we live in. So the perfect storm that I speak about is obesity. I would also say that lack of sunlight, lack of vitamin D, alluding to what you spoke about earlier on in the conversation, that people are behind their screens so we don't get the sunlight. Back in the 70s and 80s, doctors were saying to not go outside because it's dangerous for you. And I think that's a big contributing factor personally. So obesity, poor food, sedentary lifestyles, high stress environments, a lack of exercise, and then combine that with all the toxins that we have in the environment, the environmental toxins, heavy metals, mold, all of these things. These are just like combining together. And I think they're contributing in a big way to low testosterone in the general population.
And so some will supplement, some will go to the doctor and they will get testosterone injections or pellets or what have you. I know as a female having menopause, I did the bioidentical hormones, but what I really found was that I was better off without them personally myself, that finding natural ways to supplement was so much better. And now I feel my normal self now that I've just found some really natural ways to kind of do what my body's wanting to do at this age. So what are some natural ways for men, let's say their libido is low and their wife is wondering if they're attracted to them anymore, and they're feeling they're like, yes, I'm attracted to you, but maybe they just really don't know what's going on with themselves. What's the first step for a man if he's having like a low libido?
Well, I think the first one, like we spoke about earlier, and it's probably not really spoken about enough, is probably the first one is quit porn. If you're watching porn as a man, it's going to tank your libido. It's going to ruin it, because if you're used to the dopamine effect from watching a virtual woman on the internet, you're not going to have the same effect when you're around a real woman, right? So I don't think that a lot of guys understand that porn rewires your brain, so that it's going to be difficult for you to even have a libido. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think that certain deficiencies could cause hormonal imbalance in the body. So popular ones that are well known are lack of vitamin D. Vitamin D is shown in multiple studies to improve testosterone production in men, women as well. Zinc as well is another good one. But my caveat with that is when I say things that men can do or take, it's like a lot of men, they want the quick fix. Oh, what's the thing that I can take? And they always want the magic bullet, right? Whereas I'm a big believer in mastering doing the fundamentals. And the reality is that the reason that most men have imbalanced hormones, and this goes for women too, is because of the chronic three that I like to call them. So obesity, being overweight, fat loss is a big one for testosterone production, improving your sleep, and chronic stress. So if you're chronically stressed, you're going to have lots of cortisol, which is going to lower your testosterone. Same for sleep deprivation. I've written about this in my book as well. And then fat tissue, adipose tissue is actually can lower, it creates toxins in the body, which can actually lower your testosterone. And then I think the final thing is gut health. I mean, you could argue that gut health and good nutrition go hand in hand. You could say that.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of research that endotoxins, so toxins released from bacteria that are residing in your gut, i.e. from you eating junk food or not very good food, can end up secreting like this nasty stuff called endotoxins that actually lower your testosterone levels, right? So it's kind of, once again, it's like this perfect storm. So I always say to people before we talk about TRT or anything like that, or even supplements, I say, like, what's your lifestyle like? Because they always want to say to me, okay, what about this? I always say to them, what about your sleep? How do you manage stress? And what's your diet like? And oftentimes they'll be like, oh, well, but what about TRT? I'm like, no, get those things fixed first.
Pretty good answer. So let's say that they have been working on their sleep, their stress, getting out in the sun, but they're still struggling. Would you do then a blood test to see where they're at? Or would you just start, where would you start then?
So I think that 50 to 60 years ago, should we say, if you'd have done those things, or if your grandparents did those things, they probably would have been fine. But in the environment that we live in, sometimes just doing the basics alone is not enough, because of the complex nature of the society that we live in and the environment that we live in, we have to work a little bit more perhaps than our grandparents would have had to work, simply to maintain the same level or have higher. It's just due to the toxic nature of the environment that we live in. And I don't think people appreciate how toxic it is. I've looked at a lot of blood tests and a lot of, especially urine tests as well. And without fail, every single urine test, which is test for toxins in the body, everyone has something in them. So just by nature of living in somewhere like New York City or Los Angeles, you're absorbing these things into your skin and through your body every day. I see things like mold, environmental toxins, heavy metals, all of these things. And people don't really understand that they have them in their bodies. And that's having a massive impact on their hormonal status, because some of these things are endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs. So if someone tried a lot of the basics and it's not working for them, first thing I think is, what's your definition of basics? Because people don't know what they don't know. Because for a lot of people, I would say that their general idea of health and wellness is based on, okay, a few diets that are popular and maybe a few workout plans, but it doesn't go beyond that, right? So I always want to see someone follow like a lifestyle. And if their lifestyle is generally good, then okay, there's probably something else going on. So if they've got like the basics down, then I would want to look at a good blood test, because the average blood test that people do isn't really very adequate, because they have one big massive range which tests for the entire population, old, young, sick, and healthy. So for example, a testosterone test for a man can be in a range from 300 to 1,000, should we say. And if you're within that range, even if you're the bottom of the range like I was at 28 years old, you could be classed as normal, but it's suboptimal for your age, right? So the type of testing needs to be adequate. And so I would look at a blood test and maybe want to do if the person was really motivated and they've tried a lot of things but they're still not feeling good, then we want to look into other things like toxicity and things like that.
So once they clear up the toxicity, do they usually notice then a testosterone increase?
So I work with people who've increased their testosterone naturally, and a lot of the time we've been able to do it through fixing their lifestyle, and they do notice a difference. So like I've seen people double their testosterone levels by getting more things like more vitamin D in their diet, more nutrients in their diet. And I think that's the important thing, getting a lot more nutrients in their diet and doing the basics really well. And I have noticed that a lot of people do notice increase in their testosterone. Those who don't, they may well be candidates for TRT or something like that. I myself, I went on TRT at 28, and I was, at the time, I thought I was doing most things right. So I wasn't drinking alcohol, didn't smoke, didn't take drugs. I looked after my body, ate pretty well. And I had a blood test, a routine blood test, and I had the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old man. I didn't really feel like there was much more that I could do from a lifestyle perspective, because I was doing everything, and yet I still had the low level testosterone. I don't know why, but looking back, if I'd have known what I know now, I probably would have done more in-depth blood testing and looked more at toxicity. I don't regret taking it, but if I'd have known what I know now, I probably wouldn't have taken it.
Yeah, see, that's the same for me, because I did do the HRT, well, bioidentical for a while, but if I knew what I learned now, I would have never started into it. Because you almost have to be on it forever then, right? Like
You do. It's not just a test, it's a one-way ticket in most cases.
yeah, and so I don't know, I really like the natural approach. What are 7 ways that people, men specifically, can increase their testosterone naturally?
Yeah, so more vitamin D, definitely zinc, regular exercise for sure. Dropping body fat in the form of diet, I think that's important. Sleep. Stress is a big one, 6. So stress, here's the thing. When you talk to a man about, are you stressed? 9 times out of 10, he's going to
They
say
say
no.
no.
No, I'm not stressed. But then
Right.
I speak to him, I say, I look at your blood test and it tells me different. And he's like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe I am stressed. Right. So
Mhm.
I think men have a bit of a disconnect at times about the impact of stress is having on them. And men, as men, we like to think that we're indestructible and nothing can hurt us, right? And that we can deal with stress. I haven't met a single man yet that tells me that he's not stressed, right? That he can deal fine with it. And so I think that stress is really a big one. And I think when the thing is with stress, it's a very blanket, all encompassing term, right? So it's hard to distinguish what it actually means. And I think that for most men, what stress really means is understanding how they're feeling. But I don't think a lot of men are able to articulate it properly, and understanding how things are impacting them and being able to let go of it, right? And process how they're feeling, but in a masculine way. Because I think there's a negative connotation with it, that if I feel those things, then it's maybe a bit feminine or whatever. Not the case at all. I'm thinking from a very pragmatic standpoint. It's like, well, if I can process these things, I'm going to feel better. I'm not going to hold on to it. I'm not going to feel negative and all these things. So I think that's a really, really big one. And then the final one I would say is getting a more nutrient dense. We talked about diet, but getting a more nutrient dense diet, because it's very popular. You're in bodybuilding yourself, right? Doing shows. You know that things like if it fits your macros are very important. That's a big one these days. So like making sure I've got my macros, my protein, my fats, and my carbs. I see a lot of people that get enough of these macronutrients, and yet they don't have enough micronutrients in their diet, and so it's lacking. So it's all well and good having a lettuce and salad, but it doesn't really have much nutrients in it compared to something else more like spinach, kale, or something like that, right? So I think those are important. The thing is, though, if you're not a professional in it, this can seem like a lot of stuff. It's like it's overwhelming. You listen to me talk or something like that, and you're like, oh my God, I've got to do all of these things. So for someone, it's like it can oftentimes be easier just to take TRT, because it's like a whole new thing to do that. So I
Right,
totally
they're
understand.
just like done.
Basically, and I
Right,
understand
yeah.
why people would feel like that. But
Mhm.
although that's not the magic bullet that people think
But
it
it
is.
doesn't always, it's not always equally balanced when they give it to them,
I
where
mean,
when you're doing something natural, it's more balanced. When somebody gives you a surge of testosterone all at once, it isn't always balanced the way that it's supposed to be.
well, the big problem with doing testosterone, and most men don't understand this, is that, especially in the United States, if it's prescribed in the wrong way, it will mess you up worse than what happened. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of predatory practice out there, and there's
Yes.
windmill clinics that want to take men on. And I've seen so many times where men have had a normal level of testosterone, and the doctor said, "Oh, you could take TRT," and then they get them on a prescription for TRT that they'd never needed. and then they get on with a doctor who just wants to get, and not all doctors are like this, of course. I think they're definitely in the minority. Most doctors want to help people, but you get these doctors and they don't really know what they're doing or what they're prescribing, right? And so you get with a doctor, I've seen it too many times, and they're on TRT, a lifelong medication that's not to be trifled with, and they're on a terrible dose. So, for example, a good dose, an adequate dose of testosterone for a man might be 2 to 3 times a week injections to keep your blood levels stable and avoid peaks and valleys, which lead to mood swings and energy imbalances and stuff like that. But I see guys, even to this day, whose doctors are prescribing them like testosterone injections once a month, because that's what a textbook from the 1970s or 80s says. And the doctor doesn't have any practical knowledge or experience, but they're trusting the doctor because he's got an MD by his name to do the right thing. And unfortunately, it's not happening. So guys think that they can go to clinic, get fixed, and everything's all right, but they don't realize they're going on a lifelong medication. They have to take blood tests for the rest of their life, and it has to be managed and dosed properly.
Well, you definitely have to do your homework, and you have to be your own advocate. You have to do your research, and don't just trust someone because they have an MD by their name. You have to kind of work hand in hand with your doctor. It's kind of a dual relationship, but I liked what you said about stress. And I will have to say, for women out there, I experienced this myself, where my coach was coaching me and she would ask me what my stress level was, and I would say 0. And she would be like, oh, but this happened today, this, and you're going, what? How can you say your stress is 0? And so what it is you're accustomed to this amount of stress because you deal with it on the daily, and you don't realize because you're actually disconnected from it in a way. So until you're not. And so for me, my cortisol had gone through the roof. And when your cortisol is going through the roof, you can't get the results that you would get when you're stress-free. So I would say, I think I might have had a cytokine storm. It was pretty serious because I was ripping all of the muscles from the pelvis. My cortisol was off the charts. And once my body didn't feel like it was under like any kind of threat, it started going back to normal. I healed. I, am competing at 60 without a problem. I think just being in touch with your stress levels and understanding how important it is to keep your stress at a minimum and get that sleep and get that rest is key for men and women. Now, what about women? Don't women have testosterone? Don't we need it too?
Absolutely. Testosterone is fundamental to females as well. I think a lot of people think that testosterone is a male hormone exclusively, but it's just as important for female libido as well, and female function, energy, all of those things that you associate with a man, like the dynamism and the drive and stuff like that, can also contribute to female health. So it's just as important for females. It's just that females have it in a smaller amount. And to your point about, on another point about the stress levels, I work with a lot of women as well. I work with a lot of men, but I find that one thing that both sexes have in common, but especially women, and I think we could simplify stress down to one thing, which is beating yourself up or self-deprecation. And I find that most people struggle with is like beating themselves up and being too self-critical. And it's probably the biggest thing that I've coached people on, especially women, because they're so hard on themselves and put so much pressure on themselves. And just giving themselves and talking to them and helping them give themselves permission to be okay with who they are, where they are, and not feel bad and be so self-critical. And it's like a whole weight is off their shoulders. And if they follow the mantra of if you just follow the mantra of being your own best friend and not criticizing yourself for every minor transgression, life gets a lot easier and lighter as opposed to so much stress. Obviously, stress is not just down to one single thing, but I find it solves a lot of problems when you don't feel like that.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. Not criticizing yourself or comparing yourself to anyone else, but acceptance, self-acceptance. I feel like when you accept and love yourself, you take care of yourself better too, because you're not wasting all of your energy and bringing yourself down mentally because that also corresponds to the physical. But back to what you said about the testosterone for women, uh, I know weight training helps increase testosterone in both men and women naturally. So that's a great way to help increase your testosterone.
Oh yeah, I think more women should lift weights and train regularly. A lot of women, obviously you know this, right? But so many women have this perception that if I gain weight, I'll get too bulky, right? I've heard men say that before as well, which is funny. It's like, oh, I don't want to get too big. Don't worry, bro. You're not going to get too big, right? So women have half have the just a minor level of testosterone compared to a man. So the chances that they're going to get big and bulky are slim to none, right? So if it's
That would
difficult
have
for
been my mindset before, but
right,
I literally started when I needed to heal from injuries, I started taking creatine,
oh,
and
awesome.
it's been a game changer for me. I didn't get big, ladies. I didn't get big. You get this in your mind that you're gonna be like so muscular and
You just
manly.
look better. You just look better in all women. It just accentuates the female physique, and they look better in all ways. More athletic, curvy, more attractive. It's just weightlifting is amazing for women.
And it makes you, you have longer life. Like you're going to have longevity when you have muscle as well. It's proven, it's in all the research. uh just having the muscle increases your longevity by a lot.
100%. This is a very, very important one. A lot of people think that muscle building is for like I think there's a stigma attached to weight training or going to the gym, because a lot of people think it's about narcissism, and to a degree they might be slightly right, but most people that you meet who lift weights on a regular basis are actually very humble, very nice people, very down to earth, because they'll find that they have to be quite a disciplined individual and who has to go through a lot of stuff in order to continue and be consistent and persistent. So it kind of humbles your character a little bit. So people will be surprised to know that most people that lift weights are actually fairly decent people, in my experience. And regarding the research I've done some research for that for some of the books that I've written. And what I found was that the muscle mass over time is associated with longevity because it helps lower inflammation. It lowers blood sugar levels because it's a storage depot for glycogen, which is glucose. And it's also, interestingly, more muscle mass is also associated with higher survival rates for chronic diseases like cancer or surgeries, because the protein in the muscles allows the body to use it for repair from surgeries and healing, right? So if you don't have that muscle mass because you have a low level of muscle mass, the likelihood that your body will be able to repair itself goes down lower. And then, of course, as you age, you have things like sarcopenia. So my grandfather passed away about 7 or 8 years ago, and he was in his 80s. Obviously, he was at a good age, but I think he could have lived longer if he didn't have sarcopenia, which is a wasting away of muscles as you grow older. And obviously, you and I both know that people, if you're older, doesn't necessarily mean you have to have less muscle mass, but if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And so
Right.
if you maintain that muscle mass as you're older, you can avoid things like hip falls and stuff like that, and fractured bones, which unfortunately so many people get so easily, which could be easily avoided with muscle mass.
Oh my gosh, 100%. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of people that are, in their 50s and 60s, and every other one is having, they either have a fracture, they have a torn muscle, they didn't start, they just got started. Um, so like really, you have to fight to keep that muscle at a certain age, which what I mean by the fight is you got to get in there and make sure you're hitting the exercise, the weights, the resistance training. Make sure you're getting up and moving. Sitting is a new smoking, and that you're cardiovascularly fit as well as the weight training. It goes a long way. It clears the field. I mean, when you see somebody 60 that's been doing those things and somebody 60 that hasn't, it's night and day difference, I'm telling you.
Oh, 100%. Even in people in their 30s and 40s, you see that the lifetime accumulation of habits starts to show. You kind of get away with it in your 20s, but later on in life, it really starts to show. And then, unfortunately, people claim that it's age, and it has nothing to do with age. It has everything to do with their habits.
Oh my gosh, totally. It's the habits. It's the habits. And habits can be changed. You just have
Absolutely.
to want to make the change. And you don't have to do everything all at once. You can implement things, like drinking your water the first week, maybe the second week, getting more sleep, and just start implementing the habits. And I tell you, 6 months from implementing healthy habits, and you are going to be amazed at the transition that your body will make.
I couldn't agree with you more. Well said. I mean, the way that I like to think about it is if you create a handful of habits, you can literally change your life with health and fitness. The problem is that most people go at it every January in a very dogged way, and they try and do so many things all at once, and they don't understand human psychology. And human psychology is that we need to incrementally adopt one thing or two things at a time for it to you be able to assimilate it and do it. Right? If you interrupt
It's
your life
too much if it's all at once.
it's too much. But unfortunately, people don't want to hear that message. I always tell my clients, Rome was not built in a day, and take the slowly, softly,
Oh my
softly
gosh, I
approach.
say that too.
Incremental, right? And then some people they speak to me one week, and then the next week, what else can I do? What more can I do? I'm like, no, do the simple things and do them really, really well. And that's it. That's all you do. And it really is that all? Because our programming from society is that we've got to keep doing more and do more and be more. When it comes to health and fitness, all you have to do is master a handful of habits and you got it. It really is that simple, but everyone thinks it's all these bells and whistles, and it's not.
Well, it builds your confidence if you keep your promises to yourself. So if you're making
Mm,
things way too high,
mm,
you're gonna fail if you're giving yourself too much to do at first. And then what happens is you feel like a failure, so you want to quit. So if you do it the opposite way of making small promises that you keep, you're more likely to stick with it because it makes you feel like it's a win, like you feel good, and you can
mm.
stack your wins until you get the big win.
I love that. That's so true. It's all about health and fitness is an inner game. It's not an external game. People think that weight loss is all about, for example, is all about the diet and the training. I would say that's an effect of the way that you think. And so it's like your self-esteem. If you've got a good self-esteem, you're going to want to carry on doing those things. And you're absolutely right. If you do those things and they build into your self-esteem, it's going to want to motivate you to carry on. But if you can't carry them on, you're going to feel crap about yourself.
Right. And that's what happens a lot is people do that all or nothing mentality. And then that's why you quit and give up, because you couldn't do it all. So you did nothing. And it's better to be doing something continually over time. It's like the drippy faucet, or it's just like the way the tortoise and the hare have the race and the hare wins the race. It's really about that consistency, because water can cut through a rock, if it just continually flows. So you just have to realize that if you just keep going, that's the secret, is to keep going, not to quit, not to give up, and don't overload yourself. You have to make it sustainable, is the word I'm searching for.
It's a timeless wisdom, right? I think also people, sometimes I think it's important to get a bit of like be honest with themselves and get a bit of reality check. Sometimes I think to myself, why do people wait 10 or 20 years to change their health, and all of a sudden they want to do it overnight? And if they can't do it within a few months, why bother? Right. So it's like, well, if it's taking you a long time to do it, why don't you take a more longer term approach? It doesn't mean it's going to take you 10 or 20 years to change your body. Absolutely not. Right. But it's important for people to accept, okay, I haven't done this before. This is not my area of expertise. I don't have deep knowledge in this, and I don't have any experience. So I'm going to try my best and be a beginner and just learn as I go, because really it's health and fitness is like learning a series of skills, right? The skill of like learning how to eat properly, what's foods to select, how to train in the gym. People think that going to the gym is about going up and doing the workouts, but I'll lose count of the amount of people I see in the gym, and they mindlessly go through the workout. They're not present. They don't know how to lift weights. And they think they've done a workout, but they haven't. Right. So
Oh gosh,
I
not.
think people miss these nuances. They think that by showing up to the gym, it's enough, but these things are skills that take time to develop. And that's okay. If you're not a master in it, it's not a problem, but just give yourself the patience and the grace to be able to learn these things.
I love that you said that. It is about what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing. I
Mm,
mean, like, also that's the same with eating. I think it's really important to have some accountability. So maybe writing that down, what you've had all day, so that you can then over a month's time say, this is what I've eaten. And you can look back and it tells the story. It either tells the story of success, or it tells you where you might need to work, or how you might need a new strategy. But like, people lie to themselves. Oh, I've been working so hard. I've been eating so perfectly. And what in actuality, you need to know what you're actually doing instead of what you think you're doing or what your conception is. Like, you could come to the gym, let's say you have a personal trainer, and you are 30 minutes late consistently, let's just say, for your trainer, and you only worked out for 30 minutes. Let's say you're doing twice a week. Well, you missed your other 30 minutes, like, and you and your mind are working so hard, you're working 60 minutes twice a week. So you have to really be honest with yourself about what you actually are doing or not doing. It's not like you want to beat yourself up, but like, don't think, oh gosh, I'm working so hard, if maybe you only show up at the gym once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I read an interesting statistic that 80% of people who lose weight put it all back on within 12 months. And I think that, and there's also research to demonstrate that people who track what they eat, at least in the beginning, are more likely to keep the weight off because they're conscious and they're aware, like you said, of that. So I think that people have to appreciate that the process of losing weight is easier compared to sustaining it, and the sustainability is where the habits come in, right?
Right. And really the accountability of writing it down so that you actually, I mean, you can't progress with something that you don't ever measure. If you have no measurement of where you're at, how do you know?
100%.
Yeah. And I kind of want to dive into something else now. I'm switching topics a little bit. You talk some about this being the lost generation. This is the big thing. They're saying toxic masculinity. I think men are, they're browbeating them over being masculine, and women need to be stronger, or they've got to go out and they've got to be more masculine. I feel like that we have this confusion about what our roles are in general. But you were talking in your book about toxic masculinity and patriarchy. If you could dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, when I wrote the book a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, it was quite a hot topic at
Well,
the
it's a
time.
sticky wicket right now. I know I'm stepping into a sticky wicket.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that what's happened is over the last, maybe in our society over the last 100 years, there's been gender roles have become less and less defined. And I think that men, especially, women as well, because women have been given so many different responsibilities and have to wear so many different hats, that they're kind of like, well, they're expected to do so much stuff. And so there's a lot of pressure on women these days. And then men, on the other hand, it's like almost as if they don't even have a role in some cases. And so I think what happens with a lot of men is that they feel left out or left to the wayside because they don't really feel this sense of responsibility. Whereas 100 years ago, a man would have had a clear role as maybe the protector, the guardian, the provider for the family. And so that as a man, most men naturally, that's their natural instinct. So they feel like most men, if you ask them, they want to do that role. They feel good in that role because that's the natural masculine instinct. But what happens is that now man's natural instinct is to do that and be able to provide, but he's called like so many different words that when he wants to do those things, he's called so many different names because he wants to be a protector. But if he wants to be a protector and a provider for his family, so all of a sudden he's a misogynist and he's a sexist and all this kind of stuff, which isn't true. Most men want to do the right thing by their family and want to look after the female partner, right? So I think that in that sense, the biological instincts and actual human, I think in Western societies especially, the people don't really understand as much the natural inclinations of human beings anymore. Whereas if you go to Eastern cultures and Eastern European countries, they understand like the female and male dynamics are much more clearly defined, and they have a much more clearer understanding of human nature. I would say it's because that communism was so recent, so they understood what it was to suffer through things. Whereas in Western countries, probably in the last 50 or 60 years, we've had it probably pretty good. Like we've had booming times since post World War II, and so most people have grown up not knowing what it was like. The people who went through the Great Depression, they understood what it was like to go through hardship and difficulty. So they faced adversity, and so they had a bit more understanding of life in general. Whereas probably if you're born from the 50s, 60s onwards, you haven't really experienced that much in the West. So you kind of live in, sometimes I think people have the luxury of living outside of reality a little bit, right? So when you go to the Eastern countries, these people can't afford to like live in these
Right.
made up worlds, so to speak, right? So I think as a whole, I think that most men, for example, speaking as a man, most men do want to do the right thing, but they're pigeonholed into this position and told that they're this and that and this, and so they don't want to participate in society anymore. And I do feel that also women, I think that women are, there's a big community online for red pill community that basically makes a whole topic out of blaming women for everything. Right. When
Yeah.
I think a lot of men men who go on those message boards probably just need to look in the mirror instead of like blaming someone else. It's like the biggest kind of projection that there is, right? So to answer your original question about toxic masculinity and patriarchy, I think that the toxic masculinity aspect is that men are unfairly labeled toxically masculine when they're trying to just be a normal man. And anyone who would have a decent sense of like how human beings interact with each other would understand that, right? So I think but because of the way that our society is developed, now that both sexes are kind of at odds with each other or fighting with each other as opposed to having a more harmonious role like it should be.
Well, part of that is too, I think if women were honest with themselves, they do like to have their man protect them. They do like it when their man opens the door for them.
Absolutely.
They do like the chivalry. They like to feel safe. That's like the number one need for most women, is feeling safe. And
Yep.
so I think that there's a lot of skewed thinking, and where women are unsure sometimes of their role, they feel pushed into the masculine role, and they don't know how to come back into the feminine role. They don't know how to be both. And I think that with the men, they're getting yelled at when they're being very masculine and getting like a lot of pushback. And so now we have all of this kind of, I think, confusion where people aren't really sure what their role is.
Well, I also think that maybe a lot of men, they understand how to take a leadership role maybe in business or professionally, but they don't understand how to take a leadership role at home, or maybe they're afraid to take a leadership role, because if a woman trusted their masculine leadership, there probably wouldn't be arguments, right? So in some way, shape or form, it depends on the case, of course, but I think in some way, shape or form, that what the women are really sensing, but they're not really able to articulate, is the masculine leadership that they want and they crave, right? And some men are just not giving it to them, I think, in some cases.
Well, I definitely know my husband would run the Sisterhood of Sweat differently than I do, and his decisions would be more like this. I would say, though, I've learned to use my femininity in my business, and that can also be a strength, but it's just so different. I mean, the way that men and women approach certain things, I just think it's interesting. It's an interesting topic, and it's definitely a hot topic these days. But when you were talking about going through hard times, and this generation, I mean, I'm the baby boomer, and we have the millennials, and we have we have the Gen X, and I mean, oh my gosh, we just got so many things going on. But I will say, you know, people have been feeling entitled to things, and they haven't had to work as hard as their parents did in the Depression. And I see you say something about a millennial mindset, a kingpin mindset. Can we kind of dive into that a little bit? I thought that was interesting in your book.
Yeah, so what I talk about the millennial mindset, and I think it's maybe even more prevalent now with the next generation, with Generation Z, is this, like you said, it's this idea of entitlement, and that they shouldn't have to work for something. And I think that stems from having it's like, also you could call it the Google, an author called Anthony J calls it Google IQ, I think. And Google IQ is that this idea that you have access to all this information at your fingertips, and then suddenly you confuse that information with knowledge and being an expert, and you're not, right? And so people are used to getting answers like that. So why can't I get it so quickly? Right? Instead of having to actually do the work and the
instant gratification, right?
correct. Yeah. And so not having to do the work of the, for want of a better term, apprenticeship in some cases, to actually work and earn their stripes. And that was something that was impressed upon me when I was younger, either from my parents or from mentors, to actually like earn your stripes and do those things. But I think that because the way that, I don't know if it's a societal problem or the way that people are taught or just a cultural thing, but I think that there's a tendency to want to insulate younger people from difficulty or challenges because of this idea that they should always be safe and something like that. And therefore what happens is that because they're insulated a lot and because they spend lots of time behind screens, they're missing out on these challenges that would be character building.
100%. 100%. I think, when I was raising my three, I really think when I learned to let go and let them figure it out, that I was doing them a favor, because I think sometimes we disable our children instead of enable them in a good way. If you are giving into dysfunction, you're enabling them to live in dysfunction. But if you're like, you need to go get a job, you've got to go out and look 8 hours. I mean, look for a job, get out there and pound the pavement, do a hard day's labor, find out what it's like to put some elbow grease in. And then, then they appreciate more if they have a job that maybe they use their brain, but they need the experiences that we had that developed us. And I think that is a huge part of the culture, health. I mean, it's healthy for somebody to be out there working versus sitting all the time.
Well, 100%. Yeah. I think if someone learns the importance of a healthy, active lifestyle early on, it can only benefit them later on in life.
So I've really enjoyed our talk. I really enjoyed speaking about a topic that not a lot of people talk about on the Sisterhood of Sweat anyway. And I hope that the women out there got a better handle on their men and also themselves, and just a little bit more information to help guide you guys into having a healthier lifestyle, a healthier relationship, and just more information. You do a lot of coaching. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation as well. So yeah, I do men's health coaching, mindset coaching as well. And so if anyone wants to find me on either social media or my website, you can find me on social media on Twitter. My handle is @DanielKelly150. On Instagram, it's Daniel Optimized. And if you want to check out my website, it's danielkelly.health.
In your book, can you say the title of your book?
Sure. Yeah, it's my book. This current one that's on Amazon is Optimized Under 35. But I always say to men, who is aimed at men, so you might want to get it for your husband. So for men, to be honest, it's optimized under 35, but it's good for men. The content is good for men of any age.
Perfect. Well, I always say sisters have brothers. I mean,
100%.
we are a sisterhood, but like women make the world go round, men make the world go round. You got to have it all. So thank you so much for coming on, and make sure you guys check out his book, follow him on Twitter. And as always, keep on keeping on, everyone. Bye, everybody.